The demon Tom beneath the Ba Truk coconut trees. Ta Truk, there are dirt troops that look entirely ordinary by day. Just red dirt, paddy berms, a few old coconut trees, a curved bamboo leaning over the water trench, and low-lying earth mounds hidden in the grass. But the moment the sky falls dark, the wind shifts and the insects in these sea leaps. You begin to understand why the old folks there always was their children. Go wherever you want. Take the shortcut on your bike, if you must. But never assume wild land is unowned land. Never treat an old grave like a mound of dirt. And above all, never let a strange calling voice follow you home. In 1997, when this story happened, Ba Truk still carried that nameless, half-village, half-underworld aura. By day, there was the sounds of people carrying water, the clatter of bicycles, walking to school across the fields, women picking vegetables on their porches, the static hum of houses, thatched roofs. But by night, everything seemed to shrink in on itself. Every house locked its doors early. The yellowed oil lamps cast long shadows against the wall. The crackle of firewood was clear from the back kitchens. While far out there, towards the fields and the nameless graves, the darkness didn't lie still. It looked as if it were breathing. Lynn H. was still little then, at the age where she loved watching the lotto shows, easily trusted her friends, easily feared ghosts, quick to laugh and just as quick to cry. And because she was little, Lynn didn't yet know that some accidents do not end where you fall. Some falls are like an invisible hand brushing against your fate, very light, just enough to scrape the skin, stain you with mud, and bruise a knee. But from that moment on, a child's road home no longer belongs to them. That evening, a traveling lotto troupe had set up in the upper commune, and the whole region was buzzing from dusk. The crackling sound of the megaphone drifted far across the rice patches, sometimes clear, sometimes muffled, mixing with the scent of burning straw, fresh mud, ditch water, and the sharp sting of medicated oil from groups of old women, walking toward the main road. Tom rode his bike ahead, a skinny, quick-witted boy whose mouth always claimed he was afraid of nothing, but who laughed a little too loudly whenever ghost stories were told. Dao arrived, carrying on the back, hair tied up, working the bike before she eagerly called Lynn's name, sounding as if she feared missing out on the greatest event of her life tonight. Lynn ate in the yard, gathered a few dried coconut fronds, and lit 3 small torches so the 3 of them could light their short through the fields where she was closer than the main road. But it was dark, narrow, flanked by tall grass and stretches of empty land that no one had walked through in a long time. At first the trip felt like a fun, childish adventure. The torches crackled, Tom rode in front, occasionally looking back to urge the 2 girls to hurry up. Dao pedaled and chattered about the lotto, talking about how pretty the singer was supposed to be, how they had set up a brilliantly lit stage with colored bulbs, sugar cane skewers for sale, and a huge crowd of young men standing around to watch. Lit sat on the back rack, lightly holding Dao's shirt, her heart happy too, but that happiness was stretched thinner and thinner by the dirt path ahead. That the wind out in the fields wasn't like the wind in the hamlet. It blew sideways, colder, carrying the raw, earthy scent of damp soil and rotting grass. The torch in Xiao's hand kept swaying back and forth, the firelight sweeping over leaning coconuts, over the low, ash-gray mounds of earth, scattered along the edge of the field, only to vanish as quickly as if someone had just dragged the darkness back over them. The fall happened so fast, the bicycle's slits seemed to hit something buried beneath the dirt, sending the bike plunging sharply to one side. Lynn only had time to hear Dao scream before both of them tumbled. Lynn's knees hit first, her palms dragging across the dry earth, her chin barely missing a raised lump of soil. The torch dropped, the fire licking the nearby grass before dying silently in the mud. In that split second, Lynn wasn't thinking about those. She just felt the pain, the burning sting, her heart racing with embarrassment as Tums turned his bike around and rushed back. But when Tum crouched down, bringing his still-lit torch closer, the firelight revealed that what Ling was lying on wasn't an ordinary patch of dirt. It was an old earthen grave, low, elongated, its surface hardened and darker than the surrounding soil. While all around it, a few other indistinct graves humped up like turtle shells lying silently in the grass. Lin, spressing up as if stung by needles, frantically brushing the mud off her body, the pain in her hands. Dao, who was also scared but refused to admit it, blurted out that Lin had just fallen onto someone's grave, and she'd better watch out or they would follow her home to curse her. That sentence sank deep into Lin. It wasn't loud, it wasn't terrifying. But in the night, in the middle of the field, right after her own flesh had dirt, that sentence felt like a black thread tied from Lin's back straight down to the grave. Beneath, snapped at Dao to shut up, saying Lin was already scared without her making it worse, but even Nump avoided looking at the mound for too long. When Dao picked up her bike, her hands suddenly halted, her nose wrinkling. She asked Lynch said. Lynch stood there, mud smeared from her knees down to her feet, hair tangled, her breath still ragged, and just shook her head. But as the three of them pedaled on, Lynch began to realize there was a very strange scent on her shirt. Not the smell of mud, not the smell of crushed grass, but a damp metallic stench, like blood diluted in murky water. The Lotto night at the commune was crowded and bright, but Ling couldn't find the joy she had felt on the way there. The colored lights swept across the stage, the laughter, the megaphone calling numbers, the drums, the singing were all there. Yet beneath that layer of noisy life, Lin kept feeling a lingering chill on her knees. Every time someone stood behind her, she flinched her shoulders. Sis ate skewered sugarcane and tried to make Lin laugh, while Tom acted annoyed because Lin kept looking around. But Lin didn't know how to explain to them that in the middle of that crowd there were moments some stars were breathing right against her ear. No voice. No name called. Just a waft of air caking a rancid scent brushing across the back of her neck. When the show ended and the crowd slowly dispersed, the stage lights dimmed, and the main road filled with people, begged Tom and Dao to take the main road home, even though it was longer. She told them she was afraid of that place from earlier. Dao pouted, but didn't argue. Tom said the main road was fine if only to give Lynch peace of mind. At that moment, Lin thought that if she just didn't go back to the graveyard path, everything would naturally fade away. Just like so many other childhood fears that vanish, once you get home, crawl under the mosquito net and until morning. But as they neared the bamboo cluster at the edge of the hamlet, right where the lights from the houses began to thin out, Slang saw a face peering out the. It didn't stand fully out on the road. It just leaned out, like someone who had been waiting for a very long time, needing only for Lineage to pass by to inch out just enough for her to see. The face was dark, the eye sockets hollow, the mouth stretched far beyond anything normal. Ling slammed on her brakes. Dao, sitting on the back, nearly crashed into Ling's spine and snapped at her in an irritated heat. Tum turned to look in the direction Ling was staring, but saw nothing. The bamboo grove was dead silent, save for the rustle of a few dried leaves brushing against each other. Ling didn't dare say what she had seen, because she herself wanted to believe her eyes were playing tricks on her. The three rode on. Tum split off toward his house, while Dao and Lin stopped at their two adjacent homes. As Lin reached to us at her front door, a faint howl echoed from the pitch-black front yard. It didn't call Lin's name, it just howled. A thin, drawn-out sound, like someone who had lost their voice trying to mimic the wind. Ox spun around. The yard was empty. From next door, Dao asked who Lin was looking for. Lin said she heard someone howling in the yard. Dao went pale but tried to sound tough, saying maybe the person from the grave really did follow her home, so she should get inside quickly. The door to Lin's was full, the oil lamp inside, spilling a streak of yellow light. Us parents still sitting there, assuming their daughter had just taken a normal lump in the mud while playing. No one knew that when Lin stepped over the threshold, some visit also stood in the dark yard watching her. For the first day after that, things remained normal enough for the adults to reassure themselves. Lin went to school. Dao and Tum still walked with her. The sun was out, people were crossing the field paths, birds flew, dogs barked, women carried vegetables to the market, so Lin forced herself not to be afraid. But the fear didn't leave. It lingered in every revolution of the bicycle wheel over that old stretched cut, in the tight prickle across her scalp, whenever she saw the coconut trees beside the graves. By the afternoon of the second day, as the three of them rode near the graveyard, the howling sound returned. This time it wasn't vague. It came from the bushes near the dirt path, so clear that Lin braked and turned to look at Tum and Dao. The other two heard nothing. Dao started getting annoyed, telling Lynch to stop pretending, saying that if she kept it up, they'd get scared too. Tum forced a laugh, but his eyes avoided the mound. He bit her lip, got back on the bike, and kept pedaling. Just a few turns of the wheel later, the bike grew heavier. Not the sluggishest of a flat tire, but the distinct, sinking weight of a person climbing the back seat. Lisht stopped, bent down to squeeze the tire. It was still firm. She looked at the empty back seat, looked at the fields on both sides, and saw nothing. But the moment she started pedaling again, a man's voice pressed right against her ear. Very low, very calm, like a familiar friend sitting just behind her, making casual conversation on a long ride. The voice told her to keep going home, to let him follow her home. Lin couldn't scream. Her throat tightened, her legs pedaled frantically, the bike swerving wildly back and forth on the dirt path. When she finally reached home, she told her father everything. Her father didn't scold her this time. His face went still, the stillness of someone who doesn't yet know how much to believe but already feels a coldness in his gut. He asked if she had provoked anything out by the graves. Ling said she had only fallen. He told her that tomorrow morning, he would buy some offerings to apologize to the dead. It was the reaction of an ordinary father faced with something beyond his understanding. He hadn't thought of demons yet. He only thought his child had accidentally disturbed a resting place, and an apology to the dead would settle it. But that night, before any apologies could be made, Lin dreamed. The dream wasn't like a dream. It was as vivid as a piece of life dragged out of her body. Saw herself riding her bike alone on the field path in the pitch black. No Tum, no Dao, no sound of the lotto, no light from the hamlet. Her bike reached the exact spot by the grave and locked up as if someone had grabbed the wheel. She got off, hands trembling, leaning down to see if the chain had slipped. From the coconut trees beside her, a rustling sound echoed. Lin looked up and saw the upper half of a man hanging beneath a dried frond, just from the chest up. From the stomach down, he was entirely gone, as if severed by the shadows. His two hands clung to the coconut bark, his head tilted down, hair matted around his face, his mouth opening. Yet the voice didn't come from a normal throat but echoed out from inside the tree trunk. At the same time, the earth of the grave where Lin had fallen cracked open. The fissures crawled slowly like peeling dry skin, and then from beneath, the lower half of a body clawed its way up. Two mud-caked legs staggering blindly forward without an upper torso. Ling understood, with a primal knowing that bypassed words, that the two halves belonged to the exact same thing. The upper half, sliding down from the palm frond, the lower half crawling up from the grave. Both moving toward her, both repeating the demand to follow her home. When those two cold hands touched her calves, Lin woke up, sweat soaking her hair, her throat aching as if she had been screaming for a very long time. By morning, there were 5 stark bruised handprints on her calf. When Lin's father saw those marks, he could no longer comfort himself. He took his daughter over to Mr. Ching's house, a neighbor who knew basic talismans and spells, to ask him to go to the grave and offer an apology. Mr. Keithjewel should have eased Lee's mind, but instead, it became the exact point the whole family realized the thing beneath the dirt didn't want an apology. Mr. Ching brought joss paper, gold and silver foil, and incense, muttering prayers that the little girl was young, had fallen on the grave by accident, meant no disrespect, and begged the unseen spirits to forgive her. Just as the 5 incense sticks were planted into the ground, a wind flared up. The wind didn't blow from any clear direction. It swirled around the grave, sweeping the joss paper into the air, blowing the fire out mid-burn and snapped dry coconut frond down to the ground in the exact way Lin had seen in her dream. Mr. Ching tried to stay calm, telling Lin to light one more incense stick herself and personally apologize. Light knelt down, her hands shaking so badly she didn't even feel the heat when the burning ash fell on her knuckles. She said she only fell, she didn't mean to destroy anything. She was sorry. The moment the 6th stick was pushed into the soil, all 6 snuffed out. When they checked, 4 sticks were long, 2 were short. Mr. Ching stared at them for a very long time, then told them to go home. He didn't speak much on the way back. Only reached us, did he turn to Lin's father and say that this spirit was not accepting the apology. And it wasn't a normal spirit either. It was strong, vicious, and it intended to take her. He warned them to watch her for 3 days. If she was haunted again, they had to take her to Mr. Sao Ken. With that he left, leaving behind a silence in the house as heavy as a closed lid. Linz sat studying in the front room that afternoon because she didn't dare go deeper inside. Her parents had gone out on an errand, and weren't back yet. As the sky gradually darkened, the house seemed to stretch longer, deeper, every woven wall, looking as if it could hide a face behind it. Lynch tried to read the words as her notebook, but her eyes kept sliding off the page. Then, the howl rang out in the yard. It was the same howl that didn't call her name, but this time it wasn't standing by the bamboo or out in the fields anymore. It was right in front of the house. Lynn looked out and saw the upper half of that man dragging itself into the yard. It had no legs yet still moved forward, the severed torso hovering horribly low to the ground, its 2 arms propping it up like an animal bent into the wrong shape. Its mouth stretched almost to its ears. Lynch screamed, bolted from the house, and ran blindly toward Mr. Ching's home. When she glanced back, the lower half of that thing was walking on her roof, while the upper half had already slipped through her front door. Lynn no longer felt she was just being haunted. She understood that her home had been seen, her doors remembered, and her escape routes measured. That night, when her parents came back, Mr. Ching brought Lynn home, but it wasn't over. The family sat at the dinner. Lynn's sitting there, her face stark white, dark circles under her eyes, holding her chopsticks without taking a bite. Her parents, thinking she was just paralyzed by fear, coaxed her to eat a little. A normal, poor country meal of a rural family: white rice, a bit of braised fish, a bowl of soup, a few old porcelain bowls, an oil lamp placed to the side, should have been the safest place in the world. But right there, in front of her parents, Lynn slammed her bowl down with a loud clack. Her eyes rolled back, the whites completely vanishing, leaving only 2 glossy black sockets. When she opened her mouth, the voice that escaped was a man's, deep, hoarse, and so horrifyingly clear that Lynn's father froze in pure terror. It asked why the living were eating without inviting it. Then, Lynn ate. She shoveled rice into her mouth like she had been stuffed for years, finishing bowl after bowl, the pot nearly clean in an absurd short time. Her throat gulping loudly, her facial muscles stiff, her eyes looking at no one. Lynn's mother wept but didn't dare touch her child. Lynn's father, hands shaking, asked who had entered his daughter, and why. After they had gone to the grave to apologize, it still refused to let go. The voice inside Ling laughed very softly, saying this little girl was a perfect fit for it, and it was going to drag her down below to serve it. That sentence wasn't just a threat. It was a claim of ownership. It spoke like someone who had picked out a favorite object, as if Lynn were no longer human, no longer anyone's child but just a soft, pure yin soul, perfectly shaped to be pulled down into the dark. When Lynn fainted and later woke up, she recounted that she had seen everything. She saw the half-man step onto the dining table, saw him push her out of her own body, saw herself standing next to her physical form, unable to speak, unable to cry, unable to scream for her parents. For the first time in her life, Sla understood that her body did not entirely belong to her. From that night on, her fear took a new shape. She no longer feared just seeing ghosts. She feared that at any moment, she would still open her eyes, still hear, still understand. But inside her own flesh, someone else would be sitting there. The moment that Mr. Sao Kun saw Ling, he caught the metallic stench. It wasn't the smell of a child covered in mud, nor the smell of sickness, but the reek of old blood rising from grave dirt. Mr. Sao gave Ling blessed water to drink, drew a life-sealing talisman on her back, and suppressed the dark energy just long enough for Ling to tell the whole story. Once he heard it, he knew his own power wasn't enough. He was a man of the occult arts, having performed rituals in many places. But there were some things he only needed to look at, to know if he steps even slightly, the living would die first, while the other thing would simply find a new place to hide. Lynch bore a solitary yin fate, pure yin, prone to absorbing dark energy, able to see what others couldn't, easily pass beneath the earth like a wide-open door. Mr. Sao knew a way to use a bagua talisman to extract the dark energy, but pulling too hard would drag Ling's own soul out with it. A child stripped of her soul would either go mad or become an empty shell. And in this line of work, saving a person by hollowing them out was no different than losing a soul. Because of this, Mr. Sao went looking for Mr. in Vinging Long. On the morning of the 13th of the 7th lunar month that year, when Mr. walked into Mr. Bay's front yard unannounced, Mr. was in his wooden bed drinking tea. Mrs. Bay was in the back pouring more hot water, only hearing Mr. Sao's voice drop lower than usual. He said coming down to visit was one thing, but asking for help was the main reason. Mr. Bay didn't rush to accept, nor did he act like a hero. He just sat still, his finger lightly touching the rim of the teacup, his eyes looking out into the yard. A man who had seen as many cases as him knew that the most treacherous things weren't the screaming ghosts, but the cases with a deadline. In 2 days, it would be the 15th of the 7th month, the full moon, when dark forces were at their peak. A demon hiding in an earthen grave for years, encountering a pure yin child, having already possessed her once, meant every hour delayed was another door inside Lin being pried open. Mr. Bay asked Mr. Tuts he had checked the girl's fate yet. When he heard the word slaughteration short-lived, he set the teacup down. The clink of the cup against the wood was faint, but Mrs. Bay in the back kitchen heard it and knew her husband had made his decision. Mr. Bay didn't go alone. He stopped to call for Tu, the young disciple in his house, who was currently sorting nipa palm leaves for his mother. Before Tu could ask too many questions, he was told to change his clothes and pack his Mr. Rarely things was too short. The more those following him feared. On the way back to Batruk, Mr. Sao filled in the details, and as Tu listened, his stomach went cold in waves. Tu had seen possessions before, but an unrotted corpse in a grave, hoarding yin energy until it turned demonic. Right at the peak of the ghost month, meant even Mr. Bay's silence told Tu this case wasn't like the others. When they arrived at Mr. Tao's house that afternoon, the three of them rested briefly, prayed to their masters, and prepared their tools. That night, Tu lay down but couldn't sleep. From where he rested, he heard the insects in the garden, the distant barking of dogs, and Mr. Bay shifting very lightly. Mr. Bay didn't sleep deeply. A man in his trade always left one ear awake for the shadows. Near dawn, they went over to Lin's house. Stands before the front door, Mr. Bay clicked his tongue. From the outside, Lin's home looked like any other country house: thatched roof, dirt yard, low back kitchen, and an altar in the main room. But, to this, the dark energy inside was as thick as black rain clouds. He lit incense before his ancestral altar, stood looking at it for a long time, and then asked the parents if they had ever moved the altar. Lin's father confessed that they had renovated the house last year and moved the altar without picking an auspicious day, without praying for permission, simply assuming Zoroastrians would understand. Upon hearing this, Mr. Bay's scolding wasn't loud, but every word carried a crushing weight. An altar isn't a shelf for pictures. To move it without inviting the spirits, without notifying them, meant the ancestor leaving the house as empty as a door with no latch. In a house where a yin-fated daughter was being hunted by a demon, an empty altar was an open invitation for it to come and go as it pleased. Hearing this, Flinson's mother broke down in tears. Not because she was scolded, but because the sourced fall all those terrifying insights. Her child wasn't just fighting the thing from the grave all alone. She was fighting it in a home where there were no unseen guardians left to shield her. Lin spelled then that her cheekbones seemed to thin out. She told Mr. Bay that the night before, she was thirsty, to the kitchen for water, and heard a rustling on the thatched roof. A black lump dropped down and rolled across the floor. It had hair. It was a man's head. The head rolled to her feet, looked at her, shook back and forth, then rolled right up her body and drove itself into her back. Lin fainted in the kitchen. When she told this story, Tum and Dao weren't there, but later on, both of them changed too. Ever since Tum found out Lin was sick, he stopped taking the shortcut. He took the long way to school, claiming the dirt path was too rough, but anyone observant could see he never looked toward the coconut trees again. Dao came over to ask for Lin far less. She would stand by the fence to call her, refusing to step into the yard. The little girl who had accidentally scared Lin at grave spoken whispers, her eyes constantly darting up to Linju's roof, as if terrified that something up there would memorize her face. Children don't fully understand but they know the feeling of having been present when something evil begins, and from then on, even friendship is coated in a layer of dread. Lynch noticed it, and shame began to gnaw at her. She blamed herself for wanting to see the lotto. Blamed herself for suggesting herself for falling on the grove. And then grew angry at herself. Because she knew she was just the one who tripped. On the nights, she wasn't actively haunted, she would still lie wide awake, listening to her parents' whispers in the front room, hearing her mother's soft crying, hearing her father's heavy sighs, and thinking that if she died, perhaps, her family's suffering would end. That thought terrified her more than the howling. Because she didn't know if that thought was truly hers, or if the thing had planted it there. Mr. Bay led everyone out to the graveyard. The old earthen mounds and stood out with a wrongness to it. The dirt was as dark red as baked clay, completely bare of weeds, while the graves around it were overgrown with tall grass. Tube bent down to dig up a clump of dirt, and as he brought it to his nose, he recoiled from the metallic stench of that. Mr. Bay said, this was a demon's tomb. Beneath it lay someone who had died a wrongful death, their resentment festering into pure, dark energy. A cold force that smothered all life, which was why no grass could grow. The head of the grave faced northeast, it, catching the freezing winds, feeding the darkness beneath even more. Lynn's father didn't know whose grave it was. He had only heard the old folks say these mounds had been here for a very long time. Lost lineages with no one left to tend them. It was exactly that absolute forgottenness that made the grave so terrifying. A dead person with a name still holds a tether to the living. A nameless corpse buried in the dirt, unmourned, uncalled, unclaimed, leaves behind nothing but pure resentment after so many years, and if that resentment clings long enough, it learns how to hate everything that still breathes. Mr. Bay instructed them to prepare a fishing net, black dog's blood, 4 large sheets of yellow cloth, and a poor effigy of a male substitute. The first step was to pin the corpse. If they tried to trap the soul while the body wasn't sealed, it could return to its flesh, burst from the grave, and the problem would escalate far beyond hauntings or possessions. If that happened, even Mr. Bay and Mr. Sao combined might not be enough, because Mr. Sao had to go to Bakleo to break a curse of consecutive deaths as promised. The night of sealing the grave fell solely on Mr. Bay, too, Mr. Ching, and a few men from the hamlet to help out. Before starting, Mr. Bass set up altar art beside Lynn's house, pasting 5 thunders as talismans on the front and back door to ensure the thing couldn't slip inside to snatch anyone while he was out at the grave. The whole hamlet knew what was happening, but when they heard Biss's warning that any things missed around watching would have to bear the consequences if possessed. Doors slammed shut down every road, yet cracks in the doorways remained cracked. Because but they also cannot resist looking toward the very thing they fear. The black dog's blood was placed in a basin. Tights pinched a paper talisman between chest brawls, Mr. Bay instructed. When the talisman caught fire, he dropped it into this basin, and blue flames spread across the surface of the blood like alcohol burning. The men stretched the fishing net and walked out to the grave, each holding a corner. The moment the net was cast over the mound, the dirt hissed, sizzling like cold water thrown onto a scorching pan. But the vapor that rose didn't smell like hot earth, it smelled violently of suffocating blood. Mr. B took 4 iron nails dipped in cinnabar, chanted an incantation, and handed them to 2 to drive into the 4 corners of the net. With every strike of the hammer into the ground, Sue felt as if he wasn't driving a nail into dirt, but it hammering into something underneath that was violently trying to yank it back up. When the final nail sank deep, the wind stopped completely. It didn't just ease up, it went dead still as if someone had just held their breath. Mr. Babette declared they was at the physics apple and said they would catch the soul of falling. But that night the thetis refused to stay. Lying in her room, Lynn heard a rustling on the thatched roof right above where she lay. She saw nothing, but she heard the man's voice punching through the roof telling her, "Lock me out of my house, I will snap the neck of your entire family." The voice didn't roar, it didn't scream. It spoke very close, very calmly, like a homeowner locked out playfully reminding the children inside that he would eventually come back. The next morning, Aunt Tom next door confirmed you had heard rumstling all night on Lynn's roof, assuming the upwing on some symbols. When Lynn heard Aunt Tom say that, her eyes burned raw with shame. Her terror was no longer contained within her alone. It had spilled over to the nasals, into rumors, into looks of pity laced with fear. A child haunted by a demon doesn't just fear death. She fears becoming the hushed gossip whispered behind backs. The house people walk past a little fast. The name her friends are too afraid to call out loud when the sun goes down. On the night of catching the soul, Lynn's front yard was cleared entirely. Mr. Bay ordered 18 candles planted into 2 large circles, 9 candles each. One circle held a bagua cloth for Lynn to sit on. The other was lined with a woven mat, holding the paper effigy of the male substitute, smeared with blood from Lynn's fingertip and carrying a yellow slip of paper bearing her full name and exact time of birth. Mr. Bay used a red thread to connect the 9 candles around the effigy, weaving an invisible fence. He wasn't using Lynn as the real bait. He hid Lynn with a concealment talisman drawn directly on her back, ensuring the living could still see her. But the thing in the dark would look into the yard and see the paper effigy as Lynn. When the needle pricked her fingertip, Lynn didn't cry. Watching her blood drop onto the paper head, she suddenly felt as if she were being split in one half curled up alongside the candlelight, the other lying flat on the mat, waiting for that thing to come claim it. Lynn's mother stood inside the house, her hands gripping each other until her knuckles turned bone white. Lynn's father wanted to stay outside, but Mr. Bay forced him back in. 2 had to go inside too, but he stood pressed against the crack in the door, watching. Out the yard, Mr. Stu stood alone, before the 2 rings of a light, his cello-striped ritual robe fluttering faintly in the wind. He chanted, and a talisman burst into flames in his hand before he drove it into the ground. He chanted again, and a blue talisman beside the effigy also caught fire. The wind began a low, droning hum. The space around the yard felt as if it were being dragged downward for frogs, and the distant trenches faded away. The dogs in the hamlet fell dead silent, leaving only the trembling flames of the candles and the steady, deep, unyielding rhythm of Mr. Bay's incantations. When he raised his peach wood sword, drawing blood runes in the empty air with rooster blood, Lysine suddenly shuddered. She says it was here. Mr. Bay ordered absolute silence. 2 peered through the crack and saw a blurred, shadowy figure step into the yard on the road. It didn't walk toward Lynn. It walked straight toward the effigy, slowly, like a predator absolutely certain its prey was waiting right there. The red threads around the candle ring vibrated, pulled taut downward as if an invisible hand were pressing on them. Mr. Bay slashed his swords into the empty space inside the ring. With every strike, the candles flickered violently, the flames blowing sideways, and Mr. Bay's shadow stretched long across the dirt yard, looking exactly as if another man were fighting alongside him. The battle lasted only a few minutes, but to those huddled inside the house, dragged on like an endless night. The man's voice rang out from within the circle, furious, said that same venomous calm. It told Mr. Bay that he was no ordinary man. That sentence chilled Tu's spine more than any sentence could, because it proved the thing could evaluate, could show restraint, could recognize a worthy opponent. Wasn't a lost ghost soul that only knew how to jump out and scare people. It was an entity that had spent enough time in the dark to learn how to hunt, how to wait, how to pick the weakest target, how to slip into a home through the gap left by absent ancestors, how to make a child so exhausted and ashamed that she would eventually convince herself her own death would make life easier for everyone else. Mr. Bay turned back to the altar, drawing more talismans, chanting to summon the underworld generals. He took a small jar of dirt, earth dug beneath a dead man's coffin, and held a pinch in his mouth to communicate with the realm below. Tu only heard him murmuring, the words fading in and out of hearing. Lix sat in the other circle, her eyes wide open, watching 2 massive shadows rise from the ground behind the effigy's ring. They didn't look like the living, nor did they look like ordinary ghosts. They possessed the freezing weight of absolute law, the heavy stillness of ancient gatekeepers. When Mr. Bay pointed his hand, the wind howled so fiercely the thatched roof shuddered violently, but the moment he lowered his hand, the wind died instantly. After that, he told to take the 4 yellow cloths out to the grave and cover the 4 directions east, west, south, and north. The bagua mirror was placed so that the light of the full moon shone directly into its center, the moon's reflection glaring inside the glass like a blank white eye. Mr. Bay chanted softly, holding a burning talisman over the mirror. From beneath the net-sealed grave, smoke hissed violently up. This time the stench of blood fading, replaced by the smell of earth, a fruiting sensate like a well that hadn't seen daylight in years. Tu stood there, his arms and legs aching to the bone, not daring to make a single wrong move. He waited until the incense burned to ash before removing his cloths, packing up the mirror, and heading back to Lynn's house. Inside, Lynch was already lying down before the altar, fully conscious. Mr. Bay hadn't just caught the demon. He had also performed a ritual to invite the ancestors back, pulling those lingering ancestral spirits who still retained a bond back to the improperly moved altar, ensuring the house had its guardians again. That its doors were properly shut, and that invisible hands would block out any strange things waiting in the yard. Lynn asked who the 2 men from the ground were. Mr. Bay said they were underworld generals. He had asked them to drag the demon back down, because the living alone cannot kill something that has evaded the underworld for 100 years. Mr. Ching was given 4 talismans to paste on the back door, the kitchen, and Lynn's bedroom door. Once the incense burned out, the inner talismans were removed, leaving only the one on for permanently. Lynn's family offered a large sum of money in gratitude, but Mr. Bay refused it. He only instructed them to keep the altar strictly in its proper place, to keep the little girl indoors for the next few days, never to let her walk out to the fields alone, and if anyone called out from the yard at night, no one was to answer. After that night Lynn lived. But living did not mean returning to how things used to be. For the first few days she slept constantly, but never deeply. The slightest groan of the wind against the roof would make her ball sit bolt up, as she, clutching her throat, straining to hear if there were footsteps up there. She ate slowly, sometimes setting her bowl down mid-meal, haunted by the memory of someone else using her mouth to swallow a whole pot of rice. Her mother was immensely relieved that her daughter's eyes no longer rolled back. She longer spoke in a man's voice, but she also noticed that her daughter so long sprinted out to the yard when her friends called. Tom dropped by once, standing outside the fence, hands gripping his bicycle handlebars, mumbling a few awkward sentences before riding off. Dow brought over some guavas, leaving them on the porch, apologizing very softly, unsure if she was apologizing for the terrifying joke at the grave or for not daring to stay near Lynn during the days she was most afraid. Lynn looked at Dow, wanting to say it was okay, but the words caught in her throat. It wasn't that she was angry. She just no longer believed in the phrase, "it's okay." From then on, Lynn took the main road to school. Her father took her for a while and later let her go with the larger groups of kids. Passing by the bamboo thickets, she could still feel her heart beat differently. If someone asked to hitch a ride on the back of her bike, she always turned her head around to the handprints on her calves faded away. But during the rainy season, the skins there was always colder than the rest of her body. The house had changed too. The altar was set back in its proper place. The incense smoke rose regularly. The talisman on the front door had yellowed with age. Outsiders looking in might say the family had survived the tragedy. But in homes where death has stood out in the front yard, peace never returns intact. It is only replaced by a new kind of silence, more careful, with fewer loud bursts, and far more eyes glancing up at the roof. Mr. B. returned to Ving Long after that case, living out his days as a poor village sorcerer, helping whoever needed help, refusing to take a single coin in return. The things he did were recounted by people for years, exaggerated or downplayed, depending on who was telling the story. But those who were actually there, I rarely spoke of it loudly. For the rest of his life, whenever Tu thought of Batruk, what he remembered most was the metallic reek of red dirt on his sister's hand and the exact moment the red thread around the effigy was violently yanked down by the unseen. Mr. Mutt again lived long enough to tell the tale. Ms. Bay lived long enough to remember the morning. Mr. Sao walked into their yard unannounced. The storyteller's father still remembers Mr. Bay telling him to drop the palm leaves and leave immediately without asking questions. As for Mr. Bay, the man who had pulled Lin back from a wide-open door to the underworld, in his final days, he didn't die in a fierce magical duel, wasn't killed by a vengeful demon in the dead of night, didn't collapse before his ancestral altar, and didn't vanish into a forgotten graveyard. In 2009, he just caught a fever. A death so horribly, cruelly ordinary. He went to get a shot from a familiar doctor. That day, the doctor had come back from drinking, his eyes half closed, and grabbed the wrong medicine. Mr. Bay went into shock the moment he returned home, convulsed, foamed at the mouth, and passed away. His family initially thought it was simply his fate, until a nephew grew suspicious and asked the authorities to perform an autopsy. The results revealed he had been injected with the wrong drug. The doctor confessed, begged for a settlement, and offered compensation to avoid a lawsuit. Mr. Bay's family was struggling at the time, and knowing the dead deed could not be brought back, they accepted. That ending choked the hearts of those he said he had saved more than any ghost story ever could. He spent his entire life walking into homes suffocating with dark energy, facing down things hiding beneath conceits, commanding underworld generals to hunt demons, keeping the souls of children intact, and dragging ancestors back to their altars, only to die from the careless hand of the living during a routine medical checkup. Many years later, Lynchen is still alive, but if anyone asks about the past, she keeps the story incredibly short. She just says she got very sick when she was little and it passed. The phrase "it passed" sounds light, but her eyes go dark every time she says it. She never takes the shortcut through the graves anymore, even at high noon. She never lets children in the house play near nameless mounds of dirt. She teaches them that if they ever trip in front of a tomb, they must stand up and apologize immediately. No laughing, no pointing, no kicking the dirt. Festes stills nights, 7th month, when the full moon spills across the yard, that Lynch wakes up to pour a glass of water, stands for a very long time in front of her bedroom door, and listens to the roof. The talisman on her parents' front door is old now, the ink blurred, the paper brittle, but no one ever takes it down. Whether grass ever grew back on that field grave, people tell the stories differently depending on who you ask. Some say the soil became less red after the ritual, some say the buried net rotted away, but the cinnabar nails remain. Some say if you walk past the coconut trees at night, you no longer hear the howling, but the local dogs still refuse to cross that stretch of road. Lynn never checks to find out. She has paid enough for one instance of childhood curiosity. But that life is no longer innocent. Mr. Bay saved her from being dragged below, but no one could save her from the memory of standing outside her own flesh, watching something else use her mouth to speak to her parents. No one could save Dao from the realization that a casual, mocking threat could become a real curse first. No one could save Tumum from the reflex of pedaling faster every time the sun went down. No one could save Lynn's parents from the haunting question of why their ancestral altar had been left empty at the exact moment their child needed its protection the most. And no one could save Mr. Bay, the man who spent his life saving others, from a misplaced needle in the hands of the living. That is why the story in Botrukt doesn't end with the scream of a demon being dragged underground, nor does it end with Lynn opening her eyes fully conscious before the altar. And it certainly doesn't end with the family pasting a talisman on the door and breathing a sigh of relief. It ended much slower, much colder, in the years that followed, as the living were forced to keep on living with the parts of themselves that had been stripped away. Lynn grew up carrying a void no one else could see. The house had incense smoke again, but it was never as warm as it once was. Mr. Bay's name is spoken with deep gratitude, but his death ensures that gratitude is forever laced with a bitter sting. Out in the fields, the coconut trees still stand, the bamboo thickets still rustle, the old earthen mounds still sink lower with the passing seasons of sun and rain. And every time the ghost month returns, the moonlight still pours a freezing white over the red dirt, as if the underworld never really left, but only stepped back just far enough to let the living believe they are safe.